my question and what really fueled the writing of this book was, should we adapt? That is the building block of who we become as people, our sense of self, our sense of virtue, our sense of right and wrong. Evolutionarily, we're way behind what the technology offers us. It is likely one of the reasons why we've seen increases in mental health conditions like anxiety and depression. Artists and musicians, the really smart ones now who can afford to do so, are banning phones for a reason. It's because
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles. And joining us today is Christine Rosen, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Christine is an historian by training, having earned her PhD in American Intellectual History from Emory University after studying at the University of South Florida. Over the years, she's written across a remarkable range of topics, from science and culture to technology and society. As a senior editor at the New Atlantis and columnist for Commentary magazine, her work frequently explores how digital life reshapes human behaviour. She's also no stranger to podcasts, being one of the regular co-hosts of the Commentary magazine podcast. Her latest book, The Extinction of Experience, Reclaiming Our Humanity in a Digital World, is both a philosophical exploration and a cautionary wake-up call. It asks us to consider what happens when our lived experiences, face-to-face conversation, the rhythm of nature, even boredom itself, are gradually outsourced to screens and algorithms. Christine makes the case that while digital convenience may feel good, it also dulls something vital in our sense of self and our sense of place. I first came across Christine when she was speaking at the Charleston Literary Festival earlier this year, alongside Oxford University's Professor of Cognitive Neuroscience, Chris Summerfield, himself indeed a recent guest on Data Malarkey. Their debate on the pros and cons of AI and the consequence of us living increasingly mediated lives was titled Strange New Minds. In our conversation today, we're going to dig into how we can spot the warning signs of what Christine terms experience extinction, and why reconnecting with real-world sensory unmediated moments matters more than we might think. It is great to have you with us, Christine. Welcome to Data Malarkey.
Oh, thank you so much, Sam. I'm very pleased to be here.
Now, first off, can you tell me if that's a good narrative of how you got to be where you are today? Anything that I've missed out or got wrong? It's your chance to put the record straight.
Well, it all sounded very professional. I will just throw in that it was not a very normal career path, since I did start out on a bassoon scholarship as an undergraduate and had a meandering career path through magazines and research institutes and academia, but very happy to have landed where I am, where I'm given a lot of freedom to read and write about what I want.
Perfect. Yes, indeed. I was taken by your, I think, at least on two occasions, but one in particular in your book, when you talk about your physical relationship with your bassoon and how very different this might be from garage band or some other mediated form of music making.
Yes, exactly. It's also the bassoon being one of the goofier instruments in the woodwind family. It's something you really have to love and have a lifelong passion for to continue to play. So yes, I do force my other woodwind playing friends to play duets and trios with me sometimes, but a far cry from what most people would like to do in their free time by, I have friends who have rock bands and they're much cooler than I am, but still the pleasure of making music continues, should be a lifelong passion for lots of people.
Very good. Now listen, before we focus on your book and your thesis on the extinction of experience, I want to start with a question that's designed to get to the heart of what makes you, you. And it doesn't necessarily ask you to tell us about the day job. You may indeed talk more about the bassoon, but could you tell me, Christine, how you spend your time?
Oh, that's a great question. A lot of time reading and writing. I do devote a good part of my time every week to my labor-intensive, time-intensive hobby, which is that I train and teach the martial art of aikido. And so I am a third degree black belt, and I have the great pleasure of now training lots of students, some of whom I've now trained all the way through from their first day on the mats up through their own first black belt. And it brings me a lot of pleasure to do that. I love to teach adults new things. And so this is something that I think each of us has to challenge ourselves to do. It can be, I particularly enjoy martial arts because they are hands-on, they are unmediated. You have to give it your entire attention, and especially if you're my age, very careful attention so that you don't get hurt. But it is a sort of all-consuming mind-body experience. And so I spend many hours a week doing that. And I would say that in some ways defines me because it is a very clear boundary between the way I live in my head, which a lot of us do throughout our work if we're knowledge class workers, and we spend a lot of time staring at screens to do that work. It takes me away entirely from that world for a few hours every day in a way that I think is really necessary for grounding myself in day-to-day experience.
Perfect. How interesting. What an interesting, and from the bassoon to aikido. Fantastic.
I have some weird hobbies.
Very good. Now, first off, can you tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit more about the American Enterprise Institute, where you're a senior fellow?
Yes, we are a not-for-profit research organization. We are, I would say, mildly right of center politically, but we are a big tent. We have people from the far left to the middle left to the. We don't have any people on the far right, but we have a range of scholars who come from academia, from government work. A lot of us do, in the group that I'm in, social, cultural, constitutional studies. We have a former classics professor, law professors. It's a really eclectic range of scholars, and we're given great freedom to write about a range of issues. I obviously write a lot about technology and culture. We have economists, foreign policy people. We don't lobby for any particular sorts of legislation, but we are often consulted by lawmakers when they are thinking through how to craft legislation or regulation, for example. So it's free markets, free ideas. There are a number of these sorts of think tanks here in Washington, D.C. We're one of the older ones around, and I spend my days very much in an academic setting with my colleagues. I do teach on the side. We have a summer honors program for college students, so I teach seminars during the summer. But it is basically a research institute, but one that grants its scholars a lot of intellectual freedom, which is all too rare these days.
How fantastic! As originally a classicist myself, I'm delighted to hear you've got a classicist on board. The enduring. I mean, I spend a lot of time teaching and training in how to ask smart questions, how to go from data to insight, and I'm often encouraging people to embrace their inner Socrates and to embrace the Socratic paradox of saying out loud that all that I know is that I know nothing, and starting at that point. I think that position of intellectual humility can be good. So very good to hear that you've got a classicist. It sounds like an excellent institution.
It keeps us honest.
Absolutely. Now listen, could you set out the central thesis in your latest book, The Extinction of Experience, and explain what you mean by the assertion that mediated life is becoming normal life, why and how that's happening, and why that really matters to you and to us?
So I think for many, many years, we've talked a lot about how technology is changing the world, changing human nature, all of these things. But what struck me watching all of these transformations, and I've been studying these platforms and social media since the MySpace days, pre-Facebook. When I say MySpace, anyone under the age of 30 looks perplexed, but the rest of us nod in agreement, knowing what this is. But what I was struck by was how often the qualitative experiences were not being discussed. So very mundane things, like when you walk into an elevator or onto a bus, do people make eye contact with you? Are people aware in public space of how they're behaving, whether they're imposing on others or acknowledging others? Are we talking to our closest friends and family face to face as often as we used to? These seem like quotidian experiences that can come and go. And often people who are very enthusiastic about new technologies will say, well, we'll adapt. My question, and what really fueled the writing of this book, was, should we adapt in every case? And is the adaptation actually making us happier, healthier, better human beings? And is it having the impact on society that we had hoped? So in a handful of cases that I outline in the book, I try to make the argument that in some cases, the new thing isn't always an improvement. And particularly when it comes to our face-to-face interactions, things we do in embodied form, from something as simple as handwriting to something as daily as just walking around and being aware of our neighborhoods, our neighbors, and our community. These things are disappearing, not because anyone imposed new rules or regulations on us, but because we've sort of gradually just fallen out of the habit of doing this. And things we do every day, the habits of mind that those form, that is the building block of who we become as people, our sense of self, our sense of virtue, our sense of right and wrong. So it's not just that technologies always change and we're always going to be changing. We're never going back. And I use these tools every day, as I'm sure you and your listeners do as well. It's not a Luddite rant. It's an effort to say, when we choose this new path, what do we give up? And are we aware of what we have given up. And I think particularly when it comes to the internet and smartphone use and a lot of our mobile mediating technologies, we haven't really accounted for the losses. So I really think it's important, if we're going to move forward, that we do so with a full accounting of what we're leaving behind.
I love the image you have. You have a beautiful snow-topped mountain on the cover of your book, with a lake and mountains either side, and then a hand stretched out with the smartphone. It reminded me. I mean, not quite the same, but it reminded me very much of being at my one and only Bob Dylan gig so far at the London Palladium. Probably it was pre-pandemic, but probably about 16, 17, and I had observed, I myself had taken the odd picture at a gig. I love going to gigs. I wouldn't take a picture of theatre, but love going to gigs. But I had observed that many people were going to gigs, and if you were far back in the audience, all you would see was the phones, and you'd be able to. His Bobness has a lot of heavy bouncers at his gigs, and nobody is allowed to take any photographs. And indeed, if people and they're warned, and they're told on their tickets, and they're warned. But if anyone dares to do that, they are picked up by the collar and taken out, which must be quite an enterprise. But I think your picture and your discussion of, are people going on vacations in order to take pictures to share to demonstrate where they are? But I think your picture on the cover sums it up beautifully. Now, under COVID, screen time rocketed for adults and obviously for children too. I guess Zoom and Teams fatigue may have set in relatively soon. But do you see the pandemic as being a tipping point or an accelerator of something that we were doing in terms of mediating our lives more? Or do you think it was already well underway before that?
I do think it was an accelerant for a lot of people, but it was an accelerant for people who had previously had perhaps firmer boundaries. So the younger generation, for them, it was just business as usual because they were already on average spending 6 to 7 hours a day staring at a screen of some sort and spending a lot of time on social media. I think it was actually the upper middle age, the sort of the older Gen Xers and younger boomers who maybe had a more clear demarcation line between their screen lives and their regular lives that were obliterated, and they noticed. And I think that noticing is important because if you look at the data about screen use, which, as you say, skyrocketed during COVID for obvious reasons, particularly for people who had the luxury of being able to do their jobs then from home with Zoom meetings and whatnot, it never went back to where it was pre-pandemic. So we very quickly became habituated to doing a lot of things over Zoom. And if you talk to a lot of employers now, they will say they've really struggled in some cases, particularly with younger workers, to get them into the office face to face, interacting with colleagues in those now considered old school traditional ways. But those are ways that developed for a reason in many professions, particularly creative fields where a lot of back and forth, give and take happens much more efficiently when everyone's around a table. Now, look, I'm the last person on earth to argue that the world needs more meetings because most are useless. But we do need face-to-face time with our colleagues in a lot of industries, and I think that has been lost. And there are some interesting discussions going on now between employers and employees about what is actually necessary in terms of being in the office face-to-face. But it was certainly an accelerant, and I think it was a very negative impact on habituating people, not just to the idea that they could take their work lives entirely on the screen, but how they spent their leisure time. Downtime also became very heavily screen-based, and that I think hasn't been healthy for us as people.
I'm struck by what you say about certainly younger employees, and know many people that are kind of running businesses where actually making a phone call to somebody can be seen as almost asking too much of an employee under the age of 30. And you're so right about creative industries. I work with a lot of agencies in marketing and research and so on. Just physically getting together to discuss things, to work, just to pass a post-it across, and the complete absence of water cooler moments. I mean, I can see whole businesses not being able to take off as a result of this. I mean, we were designed and our brains are wired for face-to-face communication. This is giving way to more and more mediated forms of interaction. I mean, do you think we have the cognitive equipment equipment we need to deal with this mediated life?
No. Evolutionarily, we're way behind what the technology offers us. And I'll often have arguments with again, very pro-tech friends who say, oh, well, but now you have Zoom, now you have FaceTime. We are able to see each other's faces right now while we're having a conversation. And obviously that's better than just doing something with audio only. But we are still not picking up on all of the nonverbal signals that human beings give each other constantly in real time to signal, happiness, anger, perplexity, all the things that we are able to read about each other. We are wired to use our full bodies to do. And I think that's where the flattening that even the screen brings when we're doing FaceTime with grandma or something. There's also just the qualitative, indescribable, ineffable, but deeply important sense of presence that you give to another human being by going and seeing them in person, particularly the most vulnerable people in our society, the sick, the elderly, and children. And these are the people who I think if you look at what sort of large tech companies want to create as solutions, it's almost always targeting those populations because they require care and caregiving and unquantifiable, often unproductive time that we devote to each other. And those are always the populations that I look to when some, great new robotic seal that can be a therapy pet for grandma. These are all touted in the news media as this great solution. Whereas I think actually that's a way to avoid the solution we know is necessary, which is to be there, be present for others. But even in the workplace, I have noticed Zoom calls, you can distract, you can actually mute your colleagues. You can do all these things that are an exercise of control over others that you really can't do when you're face to face without seeming rude because we have different norms. Those norms are, again, the weird little footnotes to our everyday lives that are supposed to be reminders of what we agree is proper behavior. And I probably sound like a scoldy Victorian right now, but those rules exist to actually make each other comfortable, to allow us to go through life without being disrupted or disruptive ourselves. And I think in this new era with mobile technology, we've thrown all those rules out the window, but we're hesitant to craft new ones. And I think the ones that we're hesitant to give up, we should really attend to. Those are the ones that actually are about respect, about, as you say, humility, all these important characteristics that allow us to get along as human beings.
I was training face to face. I was running a training session the day before we record this, and I was talking to a senior team, 5 women who look after the different aspects of human resources for a big global airline, and we were talking about effective presentation and capturing attention and so on and so forth. And they were talking about one particular quarterly meeting, which is a 5-hour meeting, and the fact that very often the board of this company are on their phones, actually in other teams' meetings whilst they're present in the room. It took me back to an experience I had early in the pandemic. One of my clients at the time, consumer goods leader in a consumer goods business, she was in a market research debrief. I was attending too. It was a very boring market research debrief from a big research agency. I think they had, let's say, 162 slides to go through. Oof. What she hadn't realized so early on was that her glasses were reflective glasses. And for about 20 minutes, I could see her playing Sudoku on her phone, reflected in her glasses.
It could have been worse.
You're quite right. It could, and it was much worse. But it's all. The thing that I found interesting was that even in an unmediated environment, where, so often, you can see people typing away, you can see their hands moving up and down if you're on a Zoom or Teams call. But even in an unmediated environment, in a boardroom, people are perfectly prepared. It's perfectly acceptable for the leadership of a big listed business to not be present because they've grown used to not being present through the mediated life. On emotion. This may be too niche a psychological experiment. I did a doctorate in actually alcohol and emotion, the effects of alcohol on emotion. But on emotion, are those who live mediated lives, do you know this, are those who live mediated lives less able to distinguish between the facial characteristics, the facial expressions of emotion?
Yes, from what we've seen, particularly in studies of young people who spend a lot of time in mediated environments looking at screens, they have a hard time doing two things. One, describing what they see others' faces revealing about their emotions, but even more worrisome, identifying their own emotions. And one example I'll give is, and this is pretty common for anyone who knows teenagers and teenagers who use smartphones and social media a lot, that constant ability to distract. And this includes whether you're in a boardroom or you're in a classroom and you're bored and you pull out your phone. If you never have to sit with discomfort, if you never have to sit and identify, is this anger? Is this fear? Is this sadness? What am I feeling right now that makes me uncomfortable? If what you can do is escape that moment of boredom in a meeting or overwhelming emotion when your friend has said something you don't like, then you never have to sit and deal with it and you never have to identify it. And we are seeing this particularly in the young. And it is likely one of the reasons why we've seen increases in mental health conditions like anxiety and depression. Learning to identify and process and health in a healthy way, deal with one's emotions is part of becoming a grown-up. It's part of becoming a fully developed human person and actually a person who can flourish as a human being. And one of the things that these technologies offer us is this very seductive notion that you never really should have to do that. You can make all of your life convenient, seamless, efficient. These are the terms that you often see in advertisements for the product. But humans are messy. We have a lot of messy emotions. We are incredibly delusional about our own experiences and emotions. It's what allows us to get up every day and look at ourselves in the mirror. But those strategies for coping and developing a healthy sense, an emotional sense of self, that gets derailed, particularly in the young, if they can either distract or filter their emotions through devices that give them total control over their own and others' presence. So if I don't like something you're saying, I could just delete, or I could be like, oops, sorry, my connection's cut off. And these sorts of strategies actually over time become habits. So to the CEO who's, very importantly looking at whatever, text message they might be getting during a meeting, it's also a status marker. It's like, I don't have to listen to you. I have more important things in my time. It's why I think, to your point earlier about artists and musicians, the really smart ones now who can afford to do so are banning phones for a reason. It's because their experience of performance is completely changed when they're just seeing a sea of phones rather than a sea of faces. You think I've spoken to stand-up comics who talk about the difference between doing a set where they're working out new material when everybody's recording it and when no one's allowed to have a phone. And when no one has a phone, they can more quickly get their rhythm and figure out if a joke is landing or how the mood of the audience. Those are really important connections that we have in artistic performance, but also in our work lives, and most importantly, in our intimate lives with others. If a husband and wife are having a difficult, discussion and someone picks up a phone, that is a far more important gesture at that point in time than if they're just sitting on a bus waiting for the bus to pull away from the station. So all of those things matter. And I think we forget, again, qualitatively they matter. They're difficult to measure quantitatively, so we tend to overlook them. But we've all experienced that as people, both being the ones who have inadvertently been rude in that way and also have been on the receiving end of another person's rudeness.
I think you're being very polite by saying we've inadvertently been rude. I think some of us,
I'm being diplomatic.
Yeah. Even some of our listeners, I wouldn't say necessarily anyone on this conversation, but even some of our listeners, I reckon, might have done that deliberately. Well, hello there. It's your host, Sam here. Now, I won't keep you for long. If you've been inspired by what you've been listening to today, and you'd like to find out what type of data storyteller you are, why not go to our Data Storytelling Scorecard? Just follow the link to data-storytelling.scoreapp.com. That's score app with 2 P's. Answer 12 simple questions and you'll instantly be served with a scorecard that tells you exactly what type of data storyteller you are. Now, back to the action and our brilliant guest. Now, you use a lovely word several times already, boredom. Living a mediated life provides us very few opportunities to be bored. And you say in the book that unmediated interstitial time is going extinct. Could you sing the virtues of boredom a little bit more to us?
Yes, my sons who are about to turn 19, when they were younger, would roll their eyes every time I went on one of these rants. But those of us who grew up before mobile technology was in widespread use could take for granted that we would be bored. And I remember my parents, I would complain about boredom. They'd say, go outside and play, go find something to do. And at the time I was disgruntled and annoyed because shouldn't they be solving this problem for me? But of course they were doing the right thing, which is saying, no, you will spend your entire life trying to fill your time and you have a limited amount of it. And boredom is a useful thing to experience because you can do a number of things. You can be annoyed the whole time and then just get over it. You can find something to do, and that would require agency on your part and thoughtfulness. You can also just let your mind wander, something that we also don't let happen. Mind wandering, as we know, particularly from the history of science and invention, is an extremely creative and useful process that those parts of your brain that otherwise would be distracted come to the surface. It's why shower thoughts are a thing, because we're doing something routine. We're not really thinking. And boom, we remember, oh no, my friend's birthday was last week and I forgot it, or something like that. Those ideas and thoughts surface at those times because we've given our brains a break from constant stimulation. And daydreaming, which nowadays sounds like something from the 19th century, but should be something we embrace as well. We have to now actively choose those moments of fallow time because it's the de facto rule now to fill time, even with little games, little things on the screen. And people used to smoke. They used to have some people knit. There are things you can do to occupy yourself physically in moments of boredom, but those still free your mind. The way we deal with boredom, even those tiny little seconds at stoplights, you see people pick up their phone now, sitting on the bus, waiting for a friend to come for a dinner and they're 10 minutes late. Look up, look around, have look up moments. This is a big theme for me because we spend so much time looking down at our phones or looking at screens. Look up, look around, you'll notice something. It's once you start doing it, you realize how rare it's become in your daily life. And I think for a lot of people, I've given this task to myself and to my friends many times, go an entire day and don't pick up your phone during those interstitial moments. Just don't do it. Look around, bring a book, do something, anything but the phone, and see how you feel at the end of that day. See if your perspective has shifted even a tiny bit about your world. Most people will find that it does. Not always for the better. A friend of mine who did the experiment was complaining to me the next day. She's like, all I did is notice how terribly people dress on the subway. I was like, this was not the goal. She's very judgmental, but she was noticing though. She was looking around at other people. And I think that at least I chalk that up as a victory.
Yeah, you're so right about doing things where it's impossible to be disrupted as being a real help for enabling the subconscious mind to pop those kind of joining old and old together to make something new. I mean, I'm not sure this counts as mediated. I've for a long time had waterproof crayons in the shower for the very reason that when an insight hits you and you think it might be, you need to capture it. You don't want to have the Paul McCartney experience. It said that Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday 3 times, each one of them in a dream, and the first two he didn't write. It down. The third time took it a long time to come. But and it's interesting. I mean, I do a lot of work with the with creative communication, commercial communication businesses, and all of the. I think without exception, all of those who work in the strategic planning function, in the function where you are taking multiple different data sources and you're looking to blend them and to find some area of insight or understanding about an audience or a market or whatever it might be, all of them either run or swim in particular, and swim somewhere where you cannot possibly be interrupted by a bleep or a bing, is incredibly important. Now, listen, I'm very interested in kind of smart and smarter use of data. We talk about that the whole time on this podcast. What role do you think that the the bigness and the increasing bigness of data plays in either contributing to or helping us to resist the extinction of experience?
Well, I will say that my skepticism of some of the uses of big data hinges on the arguments often made on its behalf, not necessarily on its usefulness for individuals and particularly for companies. And the arguments made on its behalf that the more we know, the more data we have about any activity we do, or even about our own use of our bodies. If you have every fitness tracker and every, you're tracking everything, that the more information is always going to make you more knowledgeable. But information and knowledge are two very different things. And in areas where information is useful, I think large data sets and certainly, a lot of the stuff that's now coming down the pipeline with AI can be extraordinarily useful. Summarizing vast quantities of scholarly research or, collating lots of things from different areas in a way that the human mind can do, but it would take months versus minutes. Those are all perfectly useful. Where I get off the enthusiasm train is when the arguments about how it will change human nature for the better start to be made. So, for example, wearable sensors, where the argument made is if you actually knew how your body is responding in real time to a discussion with another person, you might realize you really don't like that person because your blood pressure spikes, you start to sweat, your heart is racing. So of course I read these studies and I think, well, yeah, but those are all also markers of physical attraction. So how are you going to, well, we'll look at the tone of voice. We'll look at this, that, we can scan faces. All these efforts to try to help us understand what it means to be human, in my opinion, have not come anywhere close to what art, literature, philosophy, religion, all of these human things have given us for since the beginning of time. So in that sense, I think the more techno-utopian schemes, the idea that, well, if you're unhappy in the real world, why not just live most of your life online? You have more control. These are all conceits. These are all empty promises. They are all often funded by companies that will profit from you spending more time in mediated environments. And I don't think, because of how we're designed as these quirky, evolutionarily developed creatures, they don't actually make us happier. We want them to, and that is a deeply human need. And we want to conquer space and time and geography, all these things that we have, in fact, made great strides in conquering, but we're still embodied creatures. And it's the embodiment part of it that I think we should always keep in mind when we're given promises about what data can do for us. Because data is still supposed to be our servant, not our master. And I think in contemporary society, we're too quick to allow it to become the master of our goals, of our virtue, of whatever it is we've set for ourselves as what we need and want. So in that sense, I feel that tension will only continue, particularly with AI. But there are certain fields where I don't think data has any place. And I think it actually undermines our ability to flourish and the challenges we need to become fully human.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking there about what AI is really good at, and particularly in convergent thinking, in summarizing. There's some work that a guy called Colm O'Shea at NYU has published repeatedly about how good successive generations of large language models are at convergent thinking, but how relatively hopeless they are at divergent thinking, and that this guess the next token kind of way of working, whilst that's how a lot of human learning will take place through neural networks as well, kind of wet in the human and dry in the case of large language models, but ask an LLM to tell you a good joke, particularly to write you a decent pun. I repeatedly do this. Ask it to make me puns of names of cocktails related to, I don't know, sport or whatever it might be. And it's very, very, very poor at doing it. So I'm completely with you on the convergent, and it seems like we're agreed on the divergent. They've got a long way to go.
I love that puns are what trip it up, because I love puns. I have a friend and we're always sending each other like the worst puns. But it's what it can't do is understand absurdity. And absurdity and wit. I mean, it can mimic wit. It can mimic jokes. It is a very exceptional mimic of a lot of human things. Yep. But where I get off the train on that, and where I'm particularly concerned, is how that can be very easily exploited. So if you think of these relationship chatbots, this mimicry of human connection is so sophisticated, even now in the early iterations of these things. That it really does concern me that there will be people who would prefer that form of friendship, which has, as the researchers who've studied it say, the sycophancy problem. It just tells you more things that you like because it's learning from you rather than what we know good friends and family members do for us, which is sometimes say, you're a little too much right now. You need to altered this behavior in this way. They keep us honest. They keep us accountable. That's not the role of some of these AI driven pseudo friend bots. And that is what we're looking for from technology suggests to me that we're not finding that meaning in our own lives. And that is a tragedy. That actually signals to me that something has gone wrong here in our embodied selves, and we need to make a better effort to connect in those ways.
Now, listen, on one side we have NFTs and the Van Gogh immersive experience. I know you talk about that in the book. And on the other, which you also talk about in the book, is the Harvard University's art historian Jennifer L. Roberts, who makes her students spend 3 hours examining a single painting or work of art before they even attempt to analyze it. Do you think that the Jennifer Roberts of this world can ever win again, at least at scale, or is it too late?
I hope she wins. I love that she does this with her class. And I know that other people are mimicking this technique in their fields. I think the more acceleration that particularly the AI, the promises that AI folks have made, the more we accelerate, the more uncertainty there is about future jobs, about future stability, all of these things, the more that slowing down will become a radical means of trying to understand the world. And that's what she is imposing on her students. She's not saying you have to see this or this is the only way to do it. All she's saying is stop and look. And because our world is now so incredible, it's incredible the way that we can speed everything up. We can avoid space and time. We can have anything on demand. Obviously, this isn't true for everyone, but this is the constant promise that actually slowing down, stopping, understanding where you are in that moment and just looking isn't passive anymore. That is now an active thing that we must choose to do. She does it with her students. And it also does something else. And I'm so glad you mentioned this when we first started talking. It encourages humility, particularly with art. It says to the student, yes, you're entitled to an opinion, but it should be informed. And it should begin by first just looking at this amazing thing that another human being made and being respectful of the time and the craftsmanship and the vision that it required, whether that's a perfectly crafted comedic monologue, a Bob Dylan song, a sculpture, whatever it is, that is a human communicating to other humans in a unique way. And it's the unique quality of it that demands respect and humility. And I think that's why leaving your home, going to a museum, going to a concert, going into a classroom and sitting and being willing to listen and look. Those are skills that we used to take for granted because we didn't have the option of doing it another way. Now we have the normal is to say on demand right now from my computer screen, why would I ever leave my house? Well, I'm trying to make the case for why you should leave your house. And she's making the case with her students of why you should leave and sit and look. And I do think that will return. I really have a lot of hope that people's need for connection and for slowing down a little bit. I think this is why we've seen this boom in minimalism, simplicity movements, meditation. I mean, these are all efforts for people to say, make the world slow down for a minute. How do I make my daily life a little more manageable when I'm being bombarded all the time? And that's true whether you're a gig worker who has to do everything on their phone, or in working multiple jobs and multiple shifts, or if you're a corporate executive who has 25 meetings every day. That overload is a constant presence in a lot of people's lives. And the feeling of instability is as well. So I think both of those things can be resolve slightly with this first step of slowing down, remembering we're embodied and what our limits are, because a lot of this is about it understanding limits.
I'm reminded of, I can't remember how long ago the book came out, but Carl Honoré's book In Praise of Slow and the slow food movement.
Yes.
And I feel that it's time for that book to be republished or for that movement to come center stage again. It was kind of beguiling and having proper meals that are, I think it was in the slow food movement was centered around an Italian town called Bra, where there would be festivals of 20, 30 course meals. Fantastic. Yeah. Let's definitely have more of that. You talk about a shift in the book over the past 20 years from you had to be there to your, I don't know if it's your phrase, but I like it very much, déjà du. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
So you had to be there, which was a sort of normal 20th century expression, which people would say, they're describing some event, some experience they have had as a person to another person who wasn't there. And they end up reaching a point of frustration because they can't convey what they mean. That's gone because now you can film it, or so we think. And I think so. Vejadu, which was a phrase devised by some researchers who study things like the online disinhibition effect, how our use of mediated interactions changes our expectations of our own behavior and others. Now, actually, we can feel like we have tons of experiences that we've never had because we are all, in a way, sort of voyeurs of everyone else's experience. And if you look at the kinds of things we consume online, people opening up boxes of new consumer products, people eating massive quantities of food, strange tests of, risk and fate, which we would never do ourselves, but we get the same adrenaline rush watching someone else jump out of the airplane. These are all, again, natural human impulses. We're curious. We want to understand these things. But because all of it is mediated and all of it is voyeuristic, it's weirdly we've become a society that's strangely risk averse in our everyday lives while consuming massive quantities of, rather insane activities and sometimes mimicking them through these, the younger kids with all their social media TikTok challenges and whatnot. But that is where saying you had to be there was a recognition that you actually experience is inimitable and unique. And when you have it, you can't entirely share it. And that's fine. That's why we actually go and seek out experiences. That's why if a friend says you really have to hear this concert, you try to get tickets and go. That's a distinct thing, and it's fleeting. It's ephemeral. If you miss it, you miss it. I grew up in the era where reruns of television shows were first becoming big. And this was considered this radical thing that you had missed the primetime show, but you could see it again a week later in the afternoon. And it makes people laugh now when you can see any content anywhere. But people aren't necessarily savoring what they're consuming anymore because there is so much of it. And that's where, you spoke earlier about people taking photos and videos. There's researchers who've studied what they call the photo impairment effect. People who go through museums and other vacations and just take constant pictures, and they don't seem to be experiencing in real time their actual vacation or the museum. They will remember less about that experience when they're questioned later than someone who didn't take the photo. Because our weird lizard brains record somewhere that, I have that memory outsourced. I don't really have to take it all in. Again, we're meant to really take it all in. And it doesn't mean we have to do that all day, every day. But when we're having an important experience, like looking into the eyes of a loved one over dinner, or, really sharing in a moment of great creativity at a concert, just have that experience. There's something, again, it seems radical now to say that, but it's only recently that we've decided to mediate all of those experiences. And I don't think necessarily for the better.
I was depressed to read a couple when I was kind of preparing for our conversation that the Roblox game Grow a Garden has become the world's most popular. I presume I don't even need to ask you to answer this question, but I presume that you would think, actually, just go and grow a garden. Don't not go and grow a garden. Just don't play grow a garden,
or even read a book about a garden. Yeah. Well, Roblox and I think Roblox and some of these other massive platforms, particularly the ones that encourage children to spend a lot of time in mediated environments, are also habituating in each new generation to think that leisure and relaxation has to involve technology or a screen, when in fact they'll learn a lot more about their world if they go out into it. And that took the title of my book from a naturalist who had just that concern, that each new generation was not going out into the woods and understanding species and ecosystems and how plants live and die and how it all fits together. And when they grew up and someone came to them and said, this species is going extinct, they would kind of shrug and be like, I don't even know what that is. That's my concern. Like, we have to make sure each generation keeps those traditions that we do want to survive going.
I've got a couple more questions and we'll be done. But I wondered, what's the biggest single misuse of data that you've witnessed in the mediated world?
That's a great question. From my perspective, it's the way it's been used to interpose on people's intimate lives, from dating apps to monitoring people's physical responses to others, which is the new generation of sensor technology, and employers monitoring employees in order to supposedly make things more efficient, but in fact, gleaning information, which many employees might not even realize is being gleaned, about the introvert who doesn't talk enough at meetings, or the guy who kind of only hangs out with the people in his little office area and doesn't cross the hall and talk to others. These things can all be tracked now. And I think the biggest misuse is a misunderstanding that, again, to the information knowledge distinction, that all that information is actually going to lead to more knowledge about who we are intimately with each other. And whether again, the surveillance aspect of it, habituating us to the assumption that we should always be watched. Because when we're watched, we change our behavior, whether we realize it or not, in ways very subtle that I think undermine free thought and free society. Back to the dating apps for 1 second, it also gives people this idea that even, the behavioral economist experiment, if you give people 3 options of jelly, they'll pick one, go home and be super satisfied with their choice. You give them 10 options, they pick one, they go home and they think, there was probably a better one. And scale that up to dating apps and thousands of profiles, and people, even if they do find someone they connect with, the back of their mind think, but there's so many other matches I had. Is this, so one little quirk emerges on a third date and they're like, I don't need to bother with this. I have so many other choices. So even the way it shapes our understanding of what we're looking for and the choices we make, that's where I think it can be misused, because it misunderstands what human relationships are about, which is actually understanding what a challenge it is to connect, and then the slow unfolding and bonds that form when you learn why other people are the way they are. And if you're open to that versus instantly judgmental because you think you have more options. And when I look at the young and I look at how they meet and how they date and how they're not getting married and having families, I do worry a great deal, probably most of all, about that use of data.
Very, very salutary warning. Being the generation that I am, I've got to have a Columbo question, or just a one more thing question. In the way that you assess the impact of mediated experience on what it means to be human today, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think I should have done?
I would say the one thing I would emphasize, actually, you touched on it with your discussion of music, but I would say we should all stop mediating our pleasurable experiences as much as possible. Even start noticing how often we do mediate pleasurable experiences. Our leisure time should be precious. Too few of us have enough of it. And when we have it, we often waste it on watching what other people are doing with their time, or consuming things that have been, surfaced to us by an algorithm. Get out in the world and find some weird thing you like to do with other people and just do that. Now, you can use technology to organize those things, but then when you get there, put it aside and just be around other people, because people are fascinating and interesting. Some are terrible, but most aren't. So that's actually what I would say. The mediation of pleasure is something that I think is making a lot of us unhappy. So we should try other ways of doing that.
Very good. Very good. Now, finally, where can our listeners and our viewers find out about you, your work, what you're up to online, dare I even say on social media?
I have not been and never will be on social media.
Good to hear.
Mainly because I would get fired, I think, if I was, but not because I'm a better person than anyone else. I'm able to avoid it because I was too old when it all came online. They can go to AEI.org, the American Enterprise Institute's website. I have a scholars page there where most of my work is posted. That's probably the best place to find me.
Very good. Well, we'll include links to that in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today, Christine. If only there were more people with your approach to reading the runes of the true impact of the digital revolution, I think there'd be rather less malarkey in the world of mediated experiences and rather more data-driven common sense. Christine Rosen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sam. I really enjoyed the conversation.